Welcome to Food Friends, a podcast inspiring home cooks to try new dishes in the kitchen by sharing trusted recipes, tips, and friendship. Hi, I'm Sonya.
And I'm Kari. We met in Los Angeles over 15 years ago as personal chefs and haven't stopped talking about food since. We're so glad you're here.
Hi, Kari.
Hi, Sonya. Sonya, what was your best bite of the week?
Oh, I've been so excited for this conversation because I've kind of kept a secret from you, which is...
Oh, no.
Well, I shouldn't say it's a secret. It just kind of all happened. But there's something I've been wanting to tell you about, which is that I was invited to be part of a cookbook club.
Oh,
which was...
That's so fun.
Yeah, and I actually ended up hosting our first meeting, even though I didn't create the club. But our new place has more space and... the other people had sort of smaller spaces, so we decided to do it here first. So the idea is with a cookbook club is that you pick a cookbook and everyone cooks a different recipe from it. And you can make it really easy by, if instead of having everyone buy the cookbook, you can take a picture of the table of contents, send it out to everyone. Everyone can pick what recipe they want to make and either get the book, check it out at the library, or take pictures and share it with each other. But because this was the first gathering, one of the people suggested that we each pick a cookbook we'd want to choose and we cook a recipe from it, and then we could choose from that collection of books. We didn't end up choosing from the collection of books. We kind of just decided whoever's hosting gets to pick the cookbook, which I think is actually a good way to do it. But it was really fun to see what different people would pick as their book, because there were books I had never even heard of there. There was a book that was all about dates. This woman...
Really?
Yes. It's like a date cookbook. It's new. I'll have to find the name and link it. And she made this chocolate date cake with whipped cream that was like spiced with a lot of cardamom. And then it was covered in a candy pistachio floss.
Oh
it was
God.
like, and it was layered. It was the most incredible cake I've eaten in years. And it was just someone who made it on a weekend, a home cook.
Well, I would just offer before we get into more details is part of why we started this podcast. We have this very long friendship. We know each other so well. When we recorded our podcast episode, we discovered that you have so many cookbooks that I've never heard of. And I also shared several cookbooks that when I was asked to say what are my favorite cookbooks, I was like, oh, wow, these are kind of obscure. And these are the things that I learned from them. And so to have a whole group of people that are also offering all these ideas, by the way, a date cookbook. What an interesting...
Never would have
who would have thought?
I wouldn't have thought to buy it, but then I tried this cake and I was like, oh my God, I need this book. And I just want to shout out some of the recipes that were made because we'll link them if they're available online, and also because they were all so delicious. But I'll talk about what I made for the cookbook club because I really loved it. I also made a couple mistakes, and I feel like there's some helpful advice here maybe. So one of my favorite dishes of the night was the tomato soup from the cookbook Jerusalem by Yotam Ottolenghi and Sammy Tamimi. And it was a sourdough tomato soup. And it was one of the most flavorful tomato soups I've ever had. So I'll have to find that recipe.
Wait, what do you mean a sourdough tomato soup?
So you actually blend sourdough into the soup. Almost like the
sourdough bread?
Sourdough bread. It was so good. And thankfully, I got to have leftovers the next day, which was the perfect lunch I had all week.
I mean, that's the gift of being the host, right? That you get the leftovers.
Well, one of the guests, Elizabeth, who started the whole club, she brought along deli containers so that everyone could take some home. That was so thoughtful. That was so thoughtful for someone to be like,
yeah, that's meaningful. You've gathered all these people and then they all want to take this food home. How wonderful.
I know. So if you have a cookbook club or you're thinking about starting one, I hope this is your sign to do it. The other recipe...
And bring your deli containers.
Yes. Lauren Chandler, the amazing chef who taught us about her frittata secrets in our frittata episode, our life-changing frittata episode, she is part of this club, and she brought this incredible wedge salad. You know I love a wedge salad.
You love a wedge salad.
With a tahini ranch dressing from...
Did she make this for you? Does she know how much you love a wedge salad and how much you love tahini and ranch?
No, she did not make this for me. This is her own palette. And it's from Andy Bargani's book, who was at Bon Appetit, whose book I never looked at. And now I'm like, wow, what an amazing cookbook.
How did I miss that?
How did I miss that? There's so many to shout out, but I'll tell you what I brought, and the book I would have picked, if I had to pick a book for the first meeting, I was going to pick Tender Heart by Hetty Lee McKinnon. As you know, I've really fallen in love with that cookbook. There was this recipe I kept coming back to that always caught my eye that was called cheesy baked rice cakes and kale. And by rice cakes, I mean what you find in Korean food. They're kind of tube form and they're real squishy. They're not discs. Like in other kinds of food, you'll find rice cakes that are flat. These are tubular and squishy and delicious and chewy. And you can find them at any H Mart, at any Korean market. And usually they're in the refrigerated section, but I think you can buy shelf-stable ones too. I prefer the ones in the refrigerated section. So the description of this recipe is basically a bunch of rice cakes, cheese, a whole bunch of kale, and a simple sauce. And then you pop it in the oven. So you know how much we love casseroles.
It sounds like it's like a mac and cheese casserole, kind of.
Kind of is.
But with rice cakes.
And with a lot more vegetables, so it's not as cheesy, it's not heavy, but it has all that richness. So you make a really simple sauce with chopped tomatoes, garlic, and gochujang, which is the Korean red pepper chili flake. And if you can't get that, she gives you some swaps you could use. So she's really good in the recipe to tell you, like, if you don't have this, use that. If you don't have this, use that. Like, if you don't have kale, use chard, all that. So it's just a lot of garlic, tomato, and that gochujang, and that's kind of it, and a little bit of tiny touch of sugar. And then you cook that with some vegetable stock and you let that simmer, and then you add all your rice cakes, all your torn kale. Like you take a whole bunch of kale and just tear off the leaves, throw that in, you wilt that down, and then you top it with both shredded cheddar and torn, like ripped fresh mozzarella, like a ball of fresh mozzarella.
Oh, wow.
And then you pop that in the oven and you let that bake. What happened on the day of the event is that I did follow the directions exactly to a T, and it needed more time in the oven. And so I gave it a little more time in the oven. I could tell it, just like she does say, like bake for whatever it was, 20 minutes until golden brown on top. So I was looking for the golden brown on top and it wasn't getting golden brown. So I was like, I'll give this more time in the oven. So I gave it an extra 15 minutes. But I actually found that it should have really had an extra like 30 minutes. So the day of the cookbook club, when I served it, it was kind of soupy and loose. It still had a cheesy crust. Everything was cooked through. It wasn't like al dente, but it was soupy loose and weird.
Right.
And like
you could see the potential of it.
Yes.
But there's just that knowing what you want it to be that you wish that you had timed it differently.
Or like, I wish I just kept going in the oven for as like just sort of trusted my cook instincts, because also maybe my oven isn't that good. I'm in a new place. I haven't used it that much.
You're still getting to know it.
I do have a thermometer, so I know it was at the right temperature. But anyway, every oven does function differently. Every pan functions differently. Maybe my ceramic cast iron isn't as good as plain cast iron for conducting heat. There's so many factors. So I didn't trust my cook instincts long enough. I trusted it a little, but not enough. And so I don't think it was everyone's favorite dish. But then the next day, I was like, I am going to reheat this for a really long time to the point where I think it's actually done. And Jonathan and I loved it. He describes it as hangover food. And I think it kind of, we were not hungover, but I do think it's like that kind of comfort food, except for.
It's like comfort food. Yeah.
Yeah. Except for there's all this kale in it. So it's like kind of low key healthy and it's vegetarian. So the sauce, once I let it like really cook long enough, it became a thick sauce instead of a soupy sauce. Then it was cheesy. The beautiful tenderness of those rice cakes, they become so pillowy soft when you cook them long enough. And then there's kind of a thick, spicy tomato sauce around it. I am 100% going to make this again. I also think it could be a good put it in your freezer, bring it to a friend kind of meal. So I think there's a lot of potential to play around with it too. And I'm excited to explore more recipes in this book.
I mean, Sonya, I think there's two really important things that I want to pull out of what you just said. One of which is any home cook, you have those moments of doubt. They come up. And what I really love is that you went back the next day and you tried it again. You were like, I can fix this. I can figure this out. And instead of just chucking the recipe or just saying like, oh, it wasn't written right, there's always going to be instinctual decisions that every cook has to make beyond whatever's written on the recipe. Hetty Lee McKinnon is, by all accounts, an incredible recipe developer. People really trust her recipes. They work. And there's sometimes control that you have lost because of your oven or your whatever equipment that you're using. And so I love that you went back and that you played with it again. I also have a kind of specific question, which is, what kind of kale did you use?
Oh, that's a great question. I use lacinato or Tuscan kale because that's my favorite kind, but it doesn't specify. And in fact, like I said, it said you could use chard, you could use other things, but I like that it holds up really well to long cooking. It's a little firmer. So that was my preference. And I'm so glad you highlighted this point, which is Hetty Louie McKinnon is an excellent recipe developer. All the other recipes I've tried from that book work exactly as written. And so I don't knock her for this, but I think even the best recipe developer cannot control all the factors. Like my tomatoes could have been juicier than hers, even though I weighed them out. My rice cakes could have been a different brand and therefore affected the recipe. My mozzarella.
Well, and those are good things. Those are all good things, right? Like that kale at one time of year is different than kale at another time of year. So that's why just like leaning into your own instincts and again, not being so held to her recipe that you still allowed it extra time. And then the next day you just needed more time, I think is a really key point. It's just important to remember to trust your gut and to keep trying and keep going. And on that note, I would say my best bite of this week is kind of twofold, but it really goes back to a couple of episodes, one of which we talked about potatoes, and two, which we talked about snacking. And so I had made some mashed potatoes for a dinner, and when I peeled the potatoes, I saved the potato peels for
Did you
that
make
snack.
chips?
I made the chips with the potato peels, and I was like, no way. Is this going to taste good? We did not even get them to the table. We ate them all before dinner.
I did it too. I was like, I have to make it too. It's so good. Remind us of what you did, because not everyone maybe heard that potato episode.
I used russet potatoes. I bought organic potatoes. I scrubbed them really well with my scrub brush and got them really clean. I peeled them and then I mashed the potatoes with those potatoes. I saved the peels. I dried them. I think she also suggests soaking them in water. I completely was like doing too many other things. I forgot to do that. I just dried them. I tossed them in olive oil and salt and put them in the oven. And even in the picture, I was like, it kind of looks like they puff up a little bit. There's no way they're going to do this. And they totally puffed up. And after they came out of the oven, I did sprinkle them with a little bit of garlic salt. And I have to say, they were so addictive. Did you put any flavoring on yours?
I just did salt and pepper, but of course, garlic salt would be so much better. I just wanted to test it like you did. And I was like, they do puff up. They do get crispy.
Yeah. And Mac even asked, he was like, can I have these in my lunch tomorrow? And I was like, no, we just ate them all. What I love about the impetus of that recipe was don't waste your food. And I will never not do that with my potato skins again. It was so brilliant and so easy. It was just like toss it in some oil and throw it in the oven.
Because even if you don't eat it like a chip or a snack, it would be such a good topping for soups or on a bowl, like a little crunchy, salty bit.
Totally, totally. So I want to also kind of share something similar to what you just shared. So after this meal, we had a lot of mashed potatoes left over. I had rutabaga in my fridge. And I also had a little bit of frozen cauliflower that needed to be used up. And so I boiled the rutabaga with the potatoes and I added the cauliflower and I made a root vegetable mash, which always reminds me of you. But I had this amazing, delicious mash left over and I didn't want to eat mashed potatoes again. And so I decided to try one of those potato cake recipes, like a potato fritter. And so I had this beautiful mash and I also had kale and I had some eggs. And so I just made kind of like a loose batter with like mashed potato, egg, and chopped up kale. I just coated it in panko and it felt too loose. And
so wait, so you had your mashed potatoes, you added egg to it, you added some raw chopped kale, and then you were like forming it into patties, but it wasn't sticking totally?
It was kind of sticking, but it felt like it needed to be refrigerated before I fried it. And so I did that, and that definitely helped it. I had a choice, and I ended up choosing the purple kale that is very hearty. And I also had Swiss chard in my fridge, and I wish I had chosen the Swiss chard because when you're kind of frying a potato patty in the skillet for maybe 10 minutes at the most, that really thick kale just didn't yield as much. I didn't mind the kale, but Mac didn't love it. It's like the texture was too...
It's a little fibrous, especially
It was fibrous.
That purple kale is denser. But I think you're right. I would probably have done the same thing. And then my instinct would be next time I have to do this with a more tender green. Something soft that's going to cook quickly.
It's going to wilt quickly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We still ate it. It was still a great way to stretch one meal into two. And honestly, who doesn't love a crispy fried mashed potato cake? And I will say it made a difference. The ones that I didn't refrigerate and then fried really kind of splayed out a lot more. They still tasted great, but the other ones just look more professional in a way. Even though I was only cooking for my family, I think we always eat with our eyes first. You always want your food to look nice, even if you're not cooking at a restaurant, even if you're not hosting friends, just for your own family, for your own self.
I agree. And I think people forget how much chilling can do for you. I think you could even freeze them for 15 minutes next time because
I would probably do that.
Right? Because it just helps things hold their shape, especially when you're baking or frying something. And it's such a good reminder to use up those leftover mashed potatoes and turn them into a fritter, add some vegetables. And I love that these best bites of the week both feature kale. It's kind of fun to have two radically different ways to use up a bunch of kale.
Yeah, I love that too. I eat kale all year long. It's such a great thing to have on hand.
Wow, this was so much fun. Until next time.
Until next time, bye.
Bye.
Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating.